moments that epitomize pride, honor and glory for every Indian. From defeating Pakistan in 1948 to liberating Bangladesh in 1971 and pushing back Pakistani army intruders at Kargil in 1999, Indian Jawans have made us proud time and again.
Hello and welcome to a very special edition of Cover Story as we focus on some of the great wars fought by India. In this show, we are going to be bringing you stories of extraordinary courage, stories that make us proud of our men, guarding our independence and safeguarding our borders. First of all, we are going to begin with one of the more recent ones, the Battle of Kargil fought in 1999. Kargil was in fact our very first televised conflict which every Indian watched and heard with bated breath the sounds of guns booming in faraway borders which echoed straight into our living room. And we didn't just watch, we also prayed. Prayed for our armed forces, prayed for our soldiers and prayed for victory. And victory did come after a long 60 days and 250,000 bombs, shells and rockets that India had to fire across the line of control to bring Pakistan back to its senses. India lost over 500 brave men in Operation Vijay, meant to recapture areas of Kargil that had been occupied by Pakistan.
The Pakistani belief that they can somehow act against Kashmir, activate the Kashmir front. India will not react in a suitable way. The Kashmiris will come on down on the side of the Pakistanis and India will be left in a situation where Kashmir has gone and it is not able to do anything. Now Pakistan has been wrong on these counts in 1948, in 1965 and then again in Kargil.
The Kargil war was a sheer breach of trust by Pakistan. As the Indian Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee became the first Indian PM to ride a bus across the Wagha border to Lahore to rebuild trust, Pakistani army was illegally intruding on the Indian side of the line of control. Vajpayee's visit was boycotted by General Pervez Musharraf as he was busy with his devious plans of occupying Indian territory in Kargil. In March 1999, as India-Pakistan was signing the Lahore Declaration, Pakistan's Northern Lights Infantry was busy occupying 132 Indian posts inside Indian territory on orders from their Rawalpindi headquarters. Indian Army sent patrols after some activity was noted in the area, but it was only after a patrol led by Captain Saurabh Kalia of the 4th Jat Regiment went missing in mid-May that the army got ready for a war. Their mutilated bodies were later sent to India.
किसी युद्ध में शहीद होना एक सैनिक के लिए, उसके परिवार के लिए, देश के लिए एक सम्मान की बात होती है। मगर जो सौरभ और उसके साथियों के साथ हुआ तो वो एक बहुत ही दर्दनाक, अशोभनीय और लज्जापूर्वक घटना थी।
By mid-May, what the army thought as an ordinary intrusion turned out to be a full-blown occupation. And then India went all guns blazing with this massive Bofors gun that destroyed enemy bunkers, weakening Pakistan's defense with every shell fired. Pakistani army had made the deepest intrusion in Tololing in Dras, which turned out to be the bloodiest battle in the Kargil war. After losing a few hundred soldiers, Rajputana Rifles and 18 Grenadiers captured Tololing on the night of June 12, 1999. And on June 13, amidst heavy shelling, PM Atal Bihari Vajpayee visited the Kargil area to boost the morale of the Indian troops. Captain Vikram Batra of 13 JAK Rifles was given the task of recapturing point 5140. Captain Batra and his men climbed up the steep rock cliff in the dark of the night, reached the top despite the enemy fire and recaptured the post. Batra along with his men captured several other points for India, but he lost his life on 7 July while rescuing an injured officer. Another big victory came on July 4th with Tiger Hill or point 4660, the highest and one of the most strategic points in the area, was won by the 18th Grenadiers and the 8th Sikh Regiment. And all this while, it was the Indian Air Force that unleashed terror on the enemy, destroying their bunkers, weakening the defences with each fire from their MiGs.
The Pakistan design had been obviously that they wanted to either keep it within a limited area, and if it escalates more and then we roll out our major forces, then it would be heading for a major war situation. And they were sure in that case the world international body, the Security Council, would step in, because they were now two nuclear armed powers. But they would have achieved their objective of internationalizing it and again bringing Kashmir into international focus and debate. So I think Mr. Vajpayee did a master stroke by confining the war only to Kargil, launching everything there, yet putting the pressure on through I presume through our sources to US President, that if he doesn't behave himself, then we will respond in a much heavier way.
The war or conflict ended on 26 July 1999, well after India had gloriously recaptured the territory that had been occupied by Pakistan. But a standoff between two nuclear powers worried the rest of the world, and a concerned Bill Clinton summoned Nawaz Sharif to America. However, this is not the first time that India had been betrayed either by Pakistan or by another neighbour.
Conflict with Pakistan began right after both countries became independent over the state of Jammu and Kashmir. Not just a war, this initiated a conflict that troubles India even today.
1948, the Indian Army, Pakistan Army, we were in the strangest of situations. The command of the two armies was in the hands of British officers. This, I think, must be the first time in the history of the world where you've had a proxy commander on top of two national armies, and the two armies have gone to war with each other. So a very strange kind of a situation. But the Pakistani army didn't really exist as such at that time. So they decided to actually follow a different example of launching the conflict through the tribals, or what are called the Kabalis. And they divided these Kabalis into various Lashkars. That is where the term comes for the modern day Lashkar-e-Toiba. And these Lashkars were launched from across the so-called perceived border at that time to capture Kashmir, the whole of Jammu and Kashmir. Little did they realize that the response of the Indian Army and the Indian Air Force would be so quick. The war started really from there and then spread out. The Indian Army built in, and it was all a question of then countering the movement of the Lashkars, defeating them, pushing them back, and recapturing the areas which had been lost. This process lasted for the better part of a year and 3-4 months almost, and ended almost prematurely. And this is a very debatable issue, whether India could have sustained further, pushed further, and gone in for an all-out victory and got the whole of Jammu and Kashmir.
14 years later, in 1962, it was the other neighbour, China, that intruded into India. And India wasn't prepared for an offensive of this magnitude. Also, India didn't look at China as an enemy after Nehru's policy of Panchsheel and the famous slogan of Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai that was coined in 1954.
Now, 1962 is a sorry state of 14 years, that from 1947, 48 to 62, the Indian Army should have gone through a complete transformation, judging its the kind of threats which were manifesting against it from Pakistan. The situation against China was building up at that time. But I think there was a wrong perception about what national security was all about, what military security was all about. The military leadership was not trusted. The Indian Army was not given the wherewithal. China took advantage of it and fought the border war against us. We had no option in that but to withdraw in the face of severe pressure. We lost a lot of our good men in the northeast, in Arunachal and in Ladakh, both areas. We lost a sizable amount of territory in Aksai Chin. We lost a lot of territory in Arunachal, which was subsequently restored. It was not a very happy chapter in the history of the Indian Army or the history of India for that matter at all.
The Chinese launched simultaneous offensives in Ladakh and across the McMahon Line on 20th October 1962. The war was triggered by the border disputes and the Tibet issue. The Chinese attack was fierce, resisted by the Sikh platoon under Subedar Joginder Singh, and the Chinese fell back with heavy losses. However, the last wave of Chinese attack was much more forceful and India had very few men left to fight. Subedar himself got killed, as did 52 other men in the war, and was awarded a Paramveer Chakra posthumously. Indian Jawans lost their lives in the war. The war ended on 20th November 1962 when the Chinese declared a ceasefire, announcing its withdrawal from the disputed area. After the loss, Pakistan thought that India was still nursing its wounds from the Indochina War and would be an easy target. But India soon taught Pakistan an important lesson.
Short intervening period between 1962 and 1965. General Ayub Khan, the military dictator that time in Pakistan, perhaps perceived that the loss or the military defeat of the Indian Army in 1962 was a reinforcement of the common belief that the Indian soldier, the Indian nation was not up to being a military power. But the transformation of the Indian Army between 1962 and 1965 is a classic case of how an army can actually reinvent itself.
Just the fact that India could recover from 1962 despite America radically rearming the Pakistan army in between. The Pakistan army had a whole set of new American tanks, new American fighters, fighter aircraft I'm talking about. India would still manage to hold its own and do a significant amount of damage to Pakistan in 1965.
The 1965 war was an act of compulsion, and once again it started with an infiltration into Kashmir in early 65.
In 1965, when India found that it was not being able to contain the Kashmir front, India had no hesitation in opening the full-scale international border. Now, how it happened was that they sent in a whole bunch of infiltrators into Kashmir under what they called Op Gibraltar. And they believed that the Kashmiri population would welcome them with open arms and, Kashmir would go up in flames, the Pakistani flag would be launched. It's complete self-delusion. The Kashmiris did not welcome them at all. They reported the infiltrators, captured them and turned them in many situations. And what Pakistan was left to do was to actually attack with armor and a full-scale infantry division attack on Akhnur, which is a vulnerability of India, remains so to this day. Because there's a highway which goes and connects the Poonch-Rajouri sector, and if that gets cut off, that whole sector gets cut off. And that was the stage at which India decided it's war. And India attacked in the Lahore sector. It was spread out over several sectors after that, and then it was full-scale war. And Pakistan suddenly realized that they had bitten off this much, but they were suddenly left with a larger meal than they could actually handle. And for the rest of the war, they were trying to play catch-up. There were moments of success for them, but all in all, it was a major strategic misjudgment by Pakistan that they could attack a weak India, bite off Kashmir, take what they want and leave India with no options at all.
Hostilities intensified in August 1965 when the Pakistani army attempted to take Kashmir by force.
We went to chase raiders, and thereafter when it transpired that they were not just mere raiders, but they were also Pakistan army people dressed out of uniform in raiders' dress who were mixed with them, and then it turned into a war. As a matter of fact, you recall that is it's a defining moment for India, because that is when Prime Minister Lal Bahadur Shastri made the famous enunciation that an attack on any part of J&K is an attack on India, and India will respond at its time and place of choosing.
The war saw the Indian Air Force and the Pakistani Air Force engaging in a fierce combat for the first time since independence. Though the two forces had previously faced off in the First Kashmir War in 1947-48, the scale of combat was very limited in a scale compared to the 1965 war. Battling conflict not just on the border, India also internationalized the war. India asked United Nations to end the current conflict. On September 21, India accepted the ceasefire and Pakistan a day later. Later in January 1966 at Tashkent, an agreement was reached between Indian Prime Minister Shastri and Pakistan President Muhammad Ayub Khan. The Soviet Union acted as the moderator. As per the agreement, India returned Haji Pir and Pakistan withdrew from Akhnur. Both countries went back to their pre-conflict positions. The war was over, but not the conflict.
Well, we need to take a short break, but don't go away because we are going to come back and continue our coverage of stories of courage from the battlefield. Welcome back to a very special edition of Cover Story, where we are talking about guns, of glory, and also of a post-war post-mortem.
It was an incomplete war. The ghost of 1971 actually was born in 1965. You know, when you have such a sort of I should say preliminary bout which reaches no conclusive situation, it's almost inevitable that you'll have a follow-up round shortly. I think the seeds of 71 were sown in 1965. This is not to say that the other example of Bangladesh and the sort of independence movement over there was not a major factor. It was a major factor. But the lessons of 1965 or the beliefs on both sides that war is not going to achieve anything, Pakistan still held on to its belief that it could perhaps use force to achieve objectives, which after 1971 it has not harbored that illusion.
The War of 1971 was sparked by Bangladesh Liberation War that ignited after 1970 Pakistan election, in which East Pakistani Awami League won the majority. However, their leader Mujir-ur-Rahman was refused power by the Pakistan People's Party leader Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. To crush dissent, Pakistan ordered a massive genocide in East Pakistan. With the number of refugees rising in India, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi on 27 March 1971 expressed her full support to East Pakistan's cause. Pakistan began a campaign called Crush India within its borders, holding rallies and turning the mood extremely hostile towards India.
Well, yes, frankly saying, we fought the 48, 62, 65 before 71. All of them were single front wars as such. And 1971 was definitely a two-front war virtually, but against the same nation. In the sense, Pakistan, then East Pakistan and West Pakistan. It was a commitment of and a deployment of almost the entire Indian army. It can happen many times that you fight a war. For example, 62 was purely in Ladakh and in Arunachal Pradesh, so it was only a segment of the army involved, right? While the rest of the army was holding the western border. In 65, it was the western border being held and the whole of Eastern Command not really activated, although they were in their positions deployed, but they were not really activated into conflict. But 1971 was a time when both East and West, North, all were committed into conflict. So, yes, that was the biggest war.
On 3rd December 1971, Pakistan Air Force launched a strike on 11 airfields in northwestern India called Operation Genghis Khan. The Indian Air Force responded the same night and the war officially started, with Indian forces coordinating in a massive air, sea and land assault under the leadership of General Sam Manekshaw.
That we had an iconic military leader in the shape of the Field Marshal that time to take control and actually dictate virtually to the government of India at that time as to perhaps the timing of the war. I mean, we've heard about this many times where it is he who decided that when would be a suitable time for war. He brought in psychological warfare, he brought in special forces into it, and gave this basic direction to his troops that if you find that you are up against major resistance, then you have to only bypass. And this concept of bypass was followed to the T by the Indian Army, and therefore we got behind the Pakistanis everywhere and managed to reach the doorsteps of Dhaka within 10 or 11 days.
Lasting a fortnight, the war saw a massive victory for India and ended with unconditional surrender of East Pakistan, giving birth to Bangladesh as a new nation on 16 December 1971.
I was then a Lieutenant Colonel commanding a Gurkha battalion, 5-8 Gurkhas. As we were going through the Sarkanda and the part of the company had gone forward, by the time I reached there, or my party, which was maybe about 50 yards or 30 yards behind, following up, suddenly heard a voice saying, "Hands up." And we saw that in the Sarkanda, in a trench, there was Pakistani soldiers hiding. And as soon as assault troops had gone through, they lay low. Then they rose up and they saw me coming with this party, and obviously they realized this is the CEO of the battalion. And before I could even react, one of my protection boys jumped into the trench with his machine, it's a machine carbine, it's a Sten gun. But his Sten gun jammed. So he threw the Sten gun at them. There were 3 inside the trench. Drew his kukri. You know that the small kukri which every soldier carries. It's a very lethal weapon. And with the kukri, he killed 2 people and injured the 3rd one. Well, he saved my life, but for this award, he earned a Veer Chakra, which was presented by the President later. And Field Marshal Manekshaw, soon after the battle was over, had flown in there, and that same kukri was presented to him. The boy's name was Rifleman Padam Bahadur Mal.
We end on a note of gratitude to our armed forces for their valor, for their sacrifices, and for their courage under extreme fire. To them and to their families, a grateful nation says thank you. And from us, that's all this week. Thank you for watching this show. We'll see you again, same time next week.